our moderator this evening will be Latesha Lipscomb, as I mentioned, with Amplify GR, longtime Grand Rapidian, longtime community leader. Again, I've just seen it with my own eyes so many times, and I'm sure I've missed a lot more of it than I've seen the community getting improved because of the work that you do. And again, we're just so grateful to have you as part of this event, but also have you here in Grand Rapids doing all the things for the community that you're doing.
Thank you.
We're just a piece of that puzzle, we know that. So we love getting really good. We're also joined this evening by Tiawanna Ezell, who currently works with Urban League, formerly with Friends of Grand Rapids Parks. But again, someone with just such deep roots here in the city. Again, I just feel lucky to have Tiawanna in my life, to have someone to be able to keep it real with me in some ways, because again, I'm not from the Southeast side. I grew up in Wyoming, so having genuine deep roots with the community, again, that's such a crucial thing. And you can develop those relationships for sure. That's not a thing that, but at the end of the day, when you have someone who just, that's how they live their life, that's a huge resource. Yeah. And so Tiawanna also has gone out and done so many things to get a diverse population of folks, Black and brown community, out in nature, doing kayaking, doing hikes, doing all sorts of things where we know that there's a lack of diversity in the outdoor space. So who's doing something about it? Tiawanna is. And with that, also is actually a volunteer leader with Outdoor Afro, a national campaign, again, to do exactly that. Let's increase diversity in outdoor spaces, because we know it's better for everybody, not just any individual class or type of person. We all need to get outside, so thank you, Tiawanna, for being here. We also have, all the way up from East Lansing, Jasmine Brown, who's going to be, how much time you got left? Qualifying on her way to completing her doctorate at Michigan State University with an amazing background in forestry and one of the most unique approaches. You know, again, it's like when we're doing community-based work, it's important to know who the demographic is, and it's important to work with the community. Jasmine's gone beyond that. Like, what about all the communities that came before this community, historically, for this entire community? Like, and so much more than I've ever even thought to go back to, because I'm just trying to get the job done today. So context is really important, though. We know that. And so Jasmine Brown has been doing an amazing job with her research. And again, just really lucky to have another amazing resource here in Grand Rapids, sharing their knowledge. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Jasmine, who's going to get us started with a poem this evening.
I often start a lot of my talks with poems, simply because I am a poet. I write a lot of poems about trees, about flowers, about nature. So if I'm thinking of framing a conversation, I typically will start with a poem. And the poem that I'm reading today is entitled "The 4th of July" by Dr. Reconnection, who is a professor at Michigan State University, of course, an African-American and African-American studies. And maybe the feds did supply the hood with fireworks. And maybe the fireworks will scare the gentrifiers away. And maybe the gentrifiers will leave the hood. And maybe I'm a gentrifier. And maybe I hate to admit that. And maybe I'm not scared of fireworks. And maybe I will leave the hood for another hood. And maybe the hood will be home. And maybe I don't know where exactly is home. And maybe home is a mother. And maybe home has birds of paradise. And maybe home has a porch out front and a yard out back. And maybe home is a daughter. And maybe home is a cooing. And maybe home is a stoop out front and a walk up. And maybe home is a fireworks show at 1 a.m. And maybe a poem is home.
Oh, come on, y'all can do better than that. She started with fireworks, so you need fireworks in return. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's community conversation. As has already been alluded to, my name is Latesha Lipscomb. I am currently serving as the Director of Engagement and Relationships for Amplify GR. And what I like to say is, over the last 5 years, I have specialized in making sure that in all of the development that we do, we are honoring and uplifting resident voice and priority. I really enjoy being an accountability partner, well, on most days. Some days it depends on when you ask me. But on most days, ways. I really do enjoy being an accountability partner and making sure that our engagement is authentic, inclusionary, and really gives people an opportunity to be a part of the process so that they can develop a sense of pride and ownership in the work that is happening in their neck of the woods. I also enjoy hosting conversations like this because I am somebody who loves hard, crucial conversations. I want to talk about the issues. I want to get to the root of the issues. And so tonight, I have every intention on doing that with the time that I have. So feel absolutely free to move in closer, lean in, listen close, because tonight, we gonna have a family meeting and we gonna talk. So I'm gonna start by giving these young ladies about a 60-second opportunity to tell the audience about yourselves, for yourselves, and then we're gonna hop into it.
All right, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Tiawanna Ezell. I currently serve in the capacity as Program Manager and Community Engagement Manager for Urban League of West Michigan, located right at the corner of Eastern and Franklin here in Grand Rapids. Currently a lot of focus on tobacco reform in the state of Michigan, one of many hats that I wear, but I pride myself most on being a community advocate. I call myself a Grand Rapids lifer because I have lived here my entire life and I promise you I'm never leaving. I am committed to making Grand Rapids a great place to live for everyone. My parents have been pastors right here in 49507 for over 40 years. And so just continuing their legacy of leadership and stewardship of this community and being excellent at what I do.
Hey, welcome.
I'm honored to be on this panel. I'm Jasmine Brown. I'm currently a forestry PhD student at Michigan State University. Oftentimes I get asked, what do trees have to do with race? And just given a lot of my lived experience, we can come back to that snippet. Just given a lot of my lived experience as a Black woman in forestry, I already know that my race, my gender, where I come from has a lot to do with how I view and understand trees, but then also how people view and understand me in outdoor spaces. I think a lot about the stories that trees tell. I don't purely think about them as a wood product or something to build with. I think about them as a bridge, as a connector, as an invitation to think more about our natural world. Outside of that, I love roller skating, I'm into poetry, I have a dog, I'm a human too, so I typically like to remind people because they'll get so caught up in like, wow, you do research, and I'm like, you can talk to me like a regular person too. And I promise I don't only want to talk about school, so I'm super excited to just be able to have a friendly like family conversation about trees today.
Yeah. All right. So I gotta tell y'all like a 2-second story. So many of you know I'm a single mom, and I get the privilege of raising a dynamic human named Kais. Kais didn't want to come tonight. He was like, I'm over these community meetings, but normally, you see us hooked at the hip. So we allowed Tia to convince us to go on one of these outdoor journeys she was hosting. First of all, she is so incredibly talented at almost any and everything that like her brain can think of when it comes to outdoor spaces. So for some reason, I let her talk me into trying kayaking. It did not end well for me, okay? Her and my son made it all the way down the river and back. I probably made it like a foot out, tipped over, got stuck in the mud, and had to be pulled out, and I decided to stay on the sidelines for the rest of the time. So, outside of my treacherous story, tell the audience a little bit about what it means to you for people to be able to connect with outdoor spaces, and how have the residents of Grand Rapids been able to connect with some of those green spaces?
Yes, thank you, Latesha. We gotta get you back out there. Yeah, I think for me and my connection with outdoor space is very spiritual. It's a place where I can go and disconnect from the city. I consider myself a city girl, not in the pop culture way, but just like that likes
Carisha, please.
So it's a place where I can completely disconnect from everything that's going on, the busyness of everyday life, the sound and the noises of, traffic and things that you hear, and actually get down and touch the soil, something that hasn't been manufactured or processed. And think about the deep-rooted history of my ancestors that may have been in that space, what they may have been experiencing in that time, and just, especially when I look at trees and I think about trees and think about their history in that space and the things that the tree itself has experienced, the fact that it takes trees to grow downward first before they grow up and be rooted. And so being relatable in that moment, in that space, and just being able to be in the moment and be self-aware and understand clearly, my purpose. It's the place that I get the most clearest thoughts, and I'm able to hone in on my vision. And so a lot of that connection is absolutely spiritual and just next level for me.
And is it your love for that deep connection in those moments that drove you to want to say, I want to start programming where other Black and brown Grand Rapids residents can experience the same peace and respite that I do? And I say that because, some of you guys might not know, some of you guys might know all too well, West Michigan is an interesting beast to navigate. It's really hard to honor and uplift certain programs and ideas, especially for communities of color. Sometimes you don't always get the funding you need, you don't get the support that you need, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the way people think and perceptions of certain things. So I just want to know if you could talk a little bit about what inspired you to really go hard in the paint on behalf of other residents like you that could experience the same peace and respite.
Yeah, I think the thing that drove it home for me first is representation or lack of representation, right? I spent 5 or 6 years working for a global footwear company called Wolverine Worldwide in Rockford. And so during that time it became very apparent that there's lack of representation, even in the marketing of apparel, footwear, as if Black and brown folk don't even exist in the outdoors. And so transitioning into a role for community engagement where it was my responsibility to connect folk of color to the outdoors, again, representation, especially in this region, just is non-existent. And so someone has to be the one, right? The one of the first of everything. And so why not me? I love being in the outdoors. I love my community. Grand Rapids is full of resources and opportunities to enjoy the spaces, but we still have a lot of work to do when we talk about this equity piece, when we talk about access and making the resources available to everyone. There's a lot of work to be done, and those require hard conversations like this and others. And so I found myself being pulled into these spaces where I'm being asked to advocate or give my opinion about what I think needs to be done. And so just the representation and being willing to be the voice for my community, for my neighborhood, for my generation to talk about, what needs to change.
I love it. Clap it up for the change agency, right? Like that's what it takes. It really takes people to come together and have the courage to dream and have a vision and co-create a shared vision for the future state of neighborhoods and lived experiences. Now, Jazz, I saw you over there snapping your fingers, so a lot of this was resonating with you. I want you to talk just a little bit about outdoor spaces for you and how you think it has changed over time for people of color.
The question is so rich. Oftentimes I use storytelling to just convey an answer, and I was snapping because there were so many stories coming to my mind, and there's two that I'll share. A lot of my journey also starts with representation because I'm from Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is maybe 45 minutes from New York City. But I largely was the only Black student in all of my forestry classes. And I remember I would sit in class and I would ask myself, I was like, what if there was another Black person here before me and I just never knew? It made me feel like I was the first and the only to ever be Black and care about trees. And I was like, something about that just doesn't really feel right. I was like, I feel like I'm missing, there's a story that I should know that I don't. There's a story I should be told that I'm not learning about in school. And I was like, why is that the case? Fast forward to me being in grad school, I attended, for my master's, I ended up going to Oregon State University, a predominantly white state, a lot of issues, cold, we could go there. I'm in my forestry building. I had been there for, I want to say, 2 years. And I'm leaving my office and I'm walking to the bathroom. Somebody walks up to me and is like, are you lost? And I was like, no. I was like, I work here. And they're like, currently? I was like, yeah. I'm like, do I look lost? Because I go here. And they were like, oh, I'm sorry. And I was like, in that moment, I knew what they were trying to say. I've never seen a Black person majoring in forestry in this building. Do you belong here? And just having to restate that, yes, I belong here. Yes, I'm qualified. Yes, I'm worthy. Yes, I'm enough. That is something I find myself having to do and not wanting to do in spaces that involve anything involving nature or outdoors. So I bring that same approach to my work. I think about the stories that we don't hear, and oftentimes it is a historical story. Like you said, it has to go back in time for us to understand how do the communities that we live in and work in today, how did they wind up that way? That story is connected to the poem that I told, oftentimes because trees and gentrification, as we know, go hand in hand.
Yeah.
We have to ask ourselves, why are there certain neighborhoods that didn't already have trees? Why are we now having to come in and plant these trees? And it's largely because there was a connection, there still is, between trees and race. It wasn't as if these trees just ended up where they ended up in affluent neighborhoods. We know that they already looked at Black neighborhoods and said, I don't think y'all like nature anyways, so you probably don't need these trees. And now, when we're thinking about where these tree programs pop up, where funding pops up to even plant trees or maintain trees, now we're thinking more about tree equity and what it means for you to live in a certain zip code, to make a certain amount of money, and to simply have trees in front of your house, in your neighborhood, or on your street.
And when you take a deeper dive into that, it's so deep because not having those trees, not having that historical access to those trees, you think about how it trickles down into the social determinants of health, right? And you think about people's perceptions and their minds and what happens as a result of not having trees historically, and then all of a sudden trees are popping up everywhere in your neighborhood. And so we're gonna take a deep dive into that pretty soon, but one thing I wanna say, Tia, I wanna go back to your point about trees and just the importance of trees and how we can sometimes take trees for granted. I was looking at something online the other day and somebody was talking about the difference between outdoor trees and indoor trees and what you have to do when you're raising and nurturing a tree inside your home. And the meme talked a lot about the importance of shaking it, right? Stirring it up so that that tree can really grow. Whereas a tree on the outside, because of the wind and the rain and the storms and everything that tree goes through on the outside, it's able to grow bigger and better and stronger and faster and wider. And so when I think about that as it relates to African Americans and the struggle and some of the things we've been through over history, I just want you to talk about how you think historically African Americans have related to green spaces and why.
Yeah, thank you, Latesha. That's a really great question. And I think a lot of my conversation will come from my experience locally. And so when I think about just space in general, right, in our city, I think about my grandmother who lives to be 102 years old, but telling me stories about how when she came to Grand Rapids, Michigan to purchase her first home, how she was guided to specific areas of town that we call this process, now we call it redlining. My grandmother told me that story hundreds of times, and to just understand how in this city, those transactions took place and we were forced into certain communities, certain neighborhoods, that trauma of redlining is generational. And so we have almost been conditioned to live in certain spaces, to occupy certain areas, and almost not branch out into other spaces where, like you described in the tree examples, that would promote growth. And so I think that a lot of that has to do with things that have happened historically and the trauma that we've experienced and that we're still holding on to and passing down generationally. It contributes a lot to how we see the landscape and how we see home ownership, land ownership right here in our city.
That's awesome. Jasmine, you talked a little bit about your studies, you talked about your experience in walking through the hallway and not feeling a sense of belonging. You kind of got a little choked up there, so I can tell that it's deeply personal for you and you're passionate about trees and our people's understanding of what trees are and what they can provide. Can you talk a little bit about what your studies have shown about the historical relationship for African Americans and trees?
I love that question. I think about that question all the time because I know that when I started studying just the relationships between African Americans and trees over time, I was often challenged when it even came to that topic. They said, well, what do you mean? I would have people say, well, there must be nothing to study. And I largely realized that the relationship between African Americans and trees is deeply connected to a lot of stereotypes that we have today. The idea that Black populations don't like trees, are not connected to nature, or are disconnected from nature, which again, I was like, well, that can't quite be true. That's not the case if we think about the environmental justice movement, if we just simply think about who's involved and engaged in a lot of community activism. So I had used that approach to then say, okay, well, what if there's a different story? And from me thinking about and going back, historically there is a different story. The connection between African American and trees does not start here in the United States. It's literally involved in our DNA just because when we look at indigenous communities in Africa, they believed in tree deities, meaning trees were spiritual beings, spiritual living beings that talked, that would possess worshiping qualities, and that a lot of that is transferred to us today. So when I think about how that connection has changed over time, I have to go back, we have to go back to think about what took place before that is now informing our present.
Ooh, trees as deities. How many of y'all knew that? That is really awesome. So I don't know how much you know about Grand Rapids, Jasmine, but West Michigan as a whole is probably one of the most philanthropic places in the nation, in all of the country, right? We have access to a lot in this city, and so I'm gonna kind of pose this question to Tia, and you can chime in to talk a little bit about your experience or what you've seen in other areas, but I wanna know, in a place like Grand Rapids, where opportunities for funding is in abundance, what do you think are some of the biggest assets or draws to the outdoors currently in Grand Rapids, or draws about what we have to offer, and then what are some of the biggest barriers?
Thank you, Latesha. That's a great question. I think right now the biggest draw, I was just talking to this group of folks earlier, is the development that is happening along the Grand River, the development of the amphitheater, the soccer stadium, and all of the economic additions that will be happening in the next couple of years. That's going to bring, I think Grand Rapids is a great place and we already draw visitors from all over. I think that we have a certain amount of access and activity and activation along the Grand River, but this development project is going to drastically change things. And then when you ask what the biggest barriers are, maybe to that, such a great resource would also be access, right? It's how many people are going to feel that the amphitheater has events or projects that are welcoming and that they can be a part of. How many folks are going to have transportation, there's issues with parking, and the different things that maybe folks that don't live paycheck to paycheck have to think about. But when you live in this magnificent city, but you can't afford to pay $20 for parking downtown to enjoy an event that you think is curated for you, that is a barrier, and that will prevent your access. And so things that we dismiss, small things, are what are going to prevent us from accessing that.
Yeah, and you know, to underscore that, like, if it's not reflective of the people that we serve, then we're doing Grand Rapids a disservice anyway. If the programming that is yielded out of those spaces and places does not speak directly to the hearts and the minds and the visions and the dreams of the people that reside there, we are doing Grand Rapids a disservice. And so I think it's really important to not only build the things. I am completely in favor of all of the development that is happening downtown and in other areas like Boston Square and 49507. But I don't play any games at all about the end result being reflective of the desires of the people that reside there first. That's the only way we can ensure that gentrification does not happen, and that we are really intentional about maintaining the historical and cultural legacy of neighborhoods that we're doing this development in. Do you want to add anything to that? All right, awesome. So, with that being said, then I'm gonna drive us in a different direction. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Am I doing okay? All right, great. You guys enjoying yourself? You picking up some good nuggets? All right, that's what we like to hear. So we're gonna keep it kosher a little bit more. Jasmine, I want to talk to you before we kind of flip the script about how have people been connecting to your research, right? So you started with that awful experience, but you know, in anything we are designed to do, anything that is divine alignment in our life, there will be challenges. And so where are you now? What is your experience like as of today, and how are people connecting to your research?
I need to take that question home, because that is beautiful. That was a poem. I confidently own my identity, I own the power, I own my voice now in spaces like these, which I did not do before. I oftentimes will try and connect with people when I think about my grandmother. If there's a story I want to tell about a tree, I want to be able to take that home to my Nana and tell her, like, hey, did you know that trees also move? Did you know that trees migrate? I'll tell her so many different cool stories about trees and then connect that to my work, especially because, similar to what Tia was saying, the trauma that's passed down from generation to generation is also passed down through trees. My grandmother herself, she'll question, well, why are you so excited about trees? How is it that you arrived there if no one in your family does anything related to nature? And I found myself there through a vegetable garden. So I oftentimes will think about how else can we connect communities of color to nature, to their natural environment. Again, reconnect, because you can't make it seem as if that community does not care about trees, that community is already disconnected. So oftentimes I will try and find different ways, different outlets like this to share my work. I ultimately want us to have more conversations about trees at Black dinner tables. That is that's like the key goal of my work.
That sounds like a book title to me. Trees at Black dinner tables.
I love that. I use art, I use storytelling, I use visuals, different things, just to connect and make that connection and branch out in the ways that we talk about trees in African American communities.
I love that, and I love hearing stories about your grandmother and the Black family getting back around the dinner table, right? Like, soul food has a lot of meaning, and there's a lot of blessings and enrichment that comes from breaking bread together. And so I'm gonna look forward to reading that book. You can thank me later. Tia, I wanna, talk, I really wanna affirm you, because I think what you created when you started doing the kayaking programming and all of that was just truly transformational for the city. Truly transformational. And I say that because nobody else was walking in that lane really, or hyper-focused on creating access for people in real time. So when you think about that, when you think about your future with Outdoor Afro, what are your hopes and dreams for the people that you are inspiring by the decisions you're making?
Why are you trying to make me cry?
Because I know it's in you, and I know you care. Like, I'm telling you, I think, especially as a Black woman, I think some of y'all don't know how hard it is to function in these leadership spaces. Some of you don't realize how hard it is to navigate. So for me to watch her advertise on social media, on Facebook, to be committed despite the barriers, the challenges, the naysayers, the haters, for you to be able to push through and give my son the blessing of an experience to learn kayaking and be good at it. Now, I fell in the mud, and I'll get you later. But that's truly transformational, sis. So why? What's your why?
Yeah, thank you so much. Very affirming. I appreciate that. I'll try to come back with you. That's one of my goals this year. Public speaking without tears. So I would say for me, and I definitely have to pay homage to my team at Friends of Grand Rapids Parks because they were absolutely the catalyst for that entire movement back in 2020. I want to highlight that we did that in the middle of COVID where folks, we just were not gathering. And so people were seeking us out for opportunities because we knew we could gather in outdoor spaces. And so we did a really great job as a team in doing that. But what happened is that people were still looking for me to do that the next summer and the next summer and the next summer. So thankfully, through our partnership with the city of Grand Rapids and allowing us access to equipment, I've been able to continue that programming and that practice and lead groups of folks who have never experienced kayaking. Not only are they experiencing kayaking, they're experiencing kayaking on the Grand River right in the middle of their city, which is phenomenal because if you are a Black or brown person in Grand Rapids, then you hear old wives' tales about how dirty, how ugly, how disgusting the Grand River is, don't eat the fish, so on and so forth. And so just to see folks in a moment through an experience to have a paradigm shift from I'm unsure about this experience, I've never done this before, I'm terrified, for them to allow me to lead them on an adventure on the river in our city and to watch their minds change in that moment from an experience of maybe fear and not being sure of themselves to coming back down the river in full confidence, full swing, full paddle. I mean, it's just really exciting to see, and it's so rewarding to be able to deposit those moments into people's lives that I know they will cherish and never forget.
Clap it up for that. And Tia is good, you guys. She is really good. I was blown away, but that's what I get out there trying to wear some false eyelashes. I was trying to be cute, taking too many selfies and ticked over. And she could have just kept going without me, but she came back and she dug me out of that mud, so I will forever be grateful. Jazz, I want to talk a little bit about you both kind of hinted at redlining, and what we all know in this room to be true is that how we design and develop cities, it really affects people's quality of life. It affects how they live, work, and play in any community. So I want to ask you, do you think community mobilization can be inclusive of the Black community in a fight against green gentrification? Is it possible, or are we still too mad?
What was the ending of that? Are we still
Too mad. Too mad.
Whew. There's multiple layers to that question. I'll start there. And to answer that question, I think about a lot of the tree planting work that's being done in Metro Detroit. That's where I'm currently based. Similarly, there were a lot of stories about how, wow, there's these trees in neighborhoods that need to be planted. And they started doing studies and knocking on doors to ask people, well, do you want a tree? And they realized, they said, okay, after doing all these surveys and knocking on all these doors, the story was, we want trees, they're not managed. They're not managed. It's simply, someone comes in and plants the trees, and now they're either knocked down in a storm, they don't even grow, or they weren't planted properly. So they then ended up saying, okay, well, if we want to do community engaged work and community engaged tree planting, now we need to actually ask the residents what they want and what works for them. And now we need to make sure this is state funding. I use that example to think more about how equity has to play a role in the way that we think about trees and how they end up in certain neighborhoods. Ultimately, it is a layered question. I've heard from different tree planting programs in Metro Detroit that they sometimes don't have the funding to have sustained engagement with that community. So it simply comes in as, we'll give you a tree, see you later. We'll check that on a box, and we planted X amount of trees. They never come back to see how many are alive. So we have to think about the life cycle of a tree along with the life cycle of a community. You might plant a tree for a certain group of people. By the time, if that tree matures, that community could look very different. And that's directly connected to the way that we think about gentrification and how long it takes for a tree to become mature.
Ooh, that was good. That was really good. I want to go in a little bit deeper on that point. So let me just read for you guys what Google says the definition of green gentrification is. Google defines it as environmental, ecological, or green gentrification is a process in which cleaning up pollution or providing green amenities increases property values and attracts wealthier residents to a previously polluted or disenfranchised neighborhood. I'm gonna run that back. In which cleaning up pollution or providing green amenities increases property values and attracts wealthier residents to a previously polluted or disenfranchised neighborhood. When I say that, Tia, how do you respond?
Martin Luther King Park is a good example of a neighborhood undergoing this process. And I think that there are a lot of things contributing to that I've seen transition over time. The addition of bike lanes, the restoration of the lodge, the cityscape from Wealthy to Fuller to Franklin, leading up to that neighborhood. I think that is a good example of a neighborhood undergoing that process. And I believe us as residents, we have to be more proactive. We need to better position ourselves in spaces where we are a part of the process instead of standing on the sidelines, being reactive, watching these things happen and then complaining about it. But I think just because of several different things at play here in the city, it's hard to get in front of something like that. I think that we're going to continue to see our neighborhoods change and transition, but I know that I've taken an oath to just take up space in green spaces, take up space in my community that is always changing, take up space in my city in general. I make sure that when I go places that I showcase excellence and that people know that I'm a part of this city and I don't just exist here, but I live here and I thrive here. So I don't know necessarily that there is a solution, and I think just because of the diversity of Grand Rapids and how it will continue to change, we're going to continue to see our neighborhoods change. Take up space as those things continue to happen. We still need to maintain ownership and who we are in those spaces as they change.